pleasure to be here, Dr. Karnik, and I think your introduction or summarization was very insightful, and it had the flavor of what the book has, a dose of realism, yet ranging from being cautiously optimistic to purely optimistic. You mentioned about in your in your introduction, you spoke about moving people out of poverty. You know, we are the fifth largest economy now. We are also possibly slated to be the second fastest large economy for this year. Yet at the same time, the per capita income for India is the lowest in the G20. In fact, it is less than half to the second lowest, which is Indonesia. If, at the cost of oversimplification, if you were to pick out maybe one or two things that could draw people out of poverty, more people out of what is called the bottom of the pyramid, what would those be?
You know, I think it's a very important question, Shobit, and you're so right that while we take pride in the fact that we would be the third largest economy by any measure by 2030, in terms of per capita income, we'd yet be way, way, way down, even compared to countries like China. What can get us out of the poverty trap? I think that's a very good question. That's why intentionally in my summary, I spoke about that period from 2005 to 2015, roughly those 10 years, or 2004 to 2015. Not to do with politics, by the way, just the fact that those 5 years you have good data. And the fact that even as a low per capita income country, we can draw people out of poverty. I think that's very exciting. The concern I have though is over the last few years, somehow the process, the model of development has meant that a disproportionate part of the gain has gone to the better off. And there are many indicators of that. While at the bottom of the pyramid, we've done reasonably well, thanks to free food grain, a lot of support from the government for agriculturalists, the gas Ujala scheme, number of them which have really, if you look at good research, you'll see that at the bottom, we are able to move people up. But when you begin to get a little higher, which is why where many, many people are, hundreds of millions of people, you begin to have concerns. Just one data point. If you look at the demand for two-wheelers, which is typical, you know, most of it comes from the lower middle class, rural areas. That has slumped. We are at the level where we were in 2013. On the other hand, the demand for luxury cars has shot up, just shot up tremendously. The base is very low, obviously, but tells you something about where the incremental income of our growth is going, and that's a point of concern. So while at the really bottom of the pyramid, the real poverty and deprivation, we've moved out of that, which is great positive news as far as I'm concerned. But when you begin to move up a little bit, you begin to see that the income is not flowing in terms of natural economy. At the bottom, we are doing it by government welfare schemes. But when you look at the economic cycle, which is why I talked to the model of development, we don't seem to be able to kickstart that part of it, which is at the earning income level, to be able to move them further forward.
True. You know, what you said reminded me of a dinner conversation. I was at a dinner last month, and on my right was a very senior civil servant, and on my left was an industrialist, broad range of 800 to 1,000 crore. And actually the civil servant wasn't happy with what was happening in policy, in how we were moving forward. And there was a lot of impatience. While the entrepreneur, the industrialist, was very gung-ho, he was very excited. So it seemed like a very good change. It really, at one level, made a lot of sense. So, you know, there are, of course, we see a lot of incentivized schemes, initiatives that the government has taken, like the PLI, which is already bearing fruit. But what really could be done for the middle of the pyramid segment, especially the MSMEs, you know, which are really the employment generators, so to say, which could really ramp up the process?
You've summarized it, Shobit, and you've given part of the answer. The answer is to look at MSMEs, the small, micro and medium-sized companies, because that's where you get employment, and they will push the pedal. The government has got a number of schemes, but the ease of doing business, which is what it's focused on, and your anecdote tells the story, that for those who are medium-sized or bigger, I think there are lots of incentives and things. For those who are smaller, it's tough. Even getting credit is difficult. The new digital way of being able to record transactions and so establish your credit worthiness is going to help. But we've got to really push the pedal on that. That's one part of it. The second part is, and I know this is a minority view, particularly in terms of what the government is trying to do. We need manufacturing. But to think that manufacturing will give us jobs, to me, is a no-no. Manufacturing is automating very fast. You need that not just for cost control, but for quality, for delivery, for 24/7 operations, for a variety of reasons. And automation costs are coming down, whereas human costs, labor costs are going up. So there's a natural trade-off there. Jobs are going to come in massive number from services. And services doesn't mean, most people think, oh, IT, and that requires engineers or whatever. No, it comes from the things like tourism, which employs everybody from the bottom of the pyramid upwards. There's a whole chain. Services like that are what are going to me, seem to be the way to generate maximum jobs and employment. Manufacturing is a separate story. As a country, we need it. There are things we need to make here. We're proud that things are being made in the country, and that's good. In any case, we need that. And they will create some jobs. But to me, when you talk of MSMEs, we should not limit ourselves to manufacturing MSMEs. We should look at the micro ones that provide, the roadside food stall guy. He's a micro enterprise. One person show, sometimes a family show, employs 2 or 3 people, either from the family or outside. And those are the kinds of things that are really going to generate livelihoods. There will not be quality jobs. And therefore, answer also to your earlier question, as we move at all levels towards the so-called gig economy, right from the roadside towards sophisticated industries where people want to moonlight and do this and that, what we've got to look at is a social security system which is universal, which is provided by some combination of the government and industry, so that healthcare, basic needs, education is taken care of. That will enable people who have no other way of incomes to be able to get, maybe old age pension, to make sure healthcare is there. And so the roadside vendor or the engineer who's doing a gig job is both assured that even if I don't have a job, there's something that at least my minimal needs would be met. I think that would help.
Talking about jobs and employment, you mentioned about gig economy. You also talk about being future ready in your book. At the same time, we have these, India is always full of these dichotomies. While we're preparing to be future ready, we don't seem to be present ready also, So in terms of skilling then, what really could be done where, we could take things forward?
Skilling is definitely one of the key areas. To me, a country like ours, 1.4 million people there, 1.4 billion people, unless you skill them, all the advantages of the big population, of the demographic dividend of having less so-called dependency ratios, as the economists will tell you, will all be washed out if people don't have the skills which make them productive and employable. Now, how do you get those skills right? And I think we haven't yet found the method. Lots of things have been done. The government has taken initiatives. The private sector is trying to do this and that. But somehow the kind of skills that are required, there's yet a mismatch. So industry keeps complaining of not being able to get the right people, and people keep complaining about not getting the right jobs. How do we break out of this, to me, is really a paradoxical question which we need to answer. There have been some good experiments which have shown the way forward, where industry has indicated what the needs are, there are good skilling platforms, and something has been done. But we need to do a lot more there in skilling. But broadening that a little bit more, even education also, we are falling behind. Our graduates are mostly unemployable, and I'm being extreme but very true. They get jobs because they're graduates, not because they've learned anything which is useful to whatever job they're doing. And we need to change that drastically. Our system is too centralized, too control-driven, and has no flexibility or freedom. Most of our courses, even in some of the, not the top institutions, but some of the so-called better institutions, are 5 to 10 years behind time, especially in technology, but not just in technology. Any change in curriculum in course goes through a long, rigorous bureaucratic process done by academics, not by the bureaucrats. So I think we need to be able to break free of that and get towards a more Gazelle, agile system of quickly being able to do things. And to do it quickly, if we make an error, correct fast. And that's the problem with our skilling too. We have tried new things, but we are not correcting the mistakes, or you might say the missteps, quickly enough to get on to saying, okay, how do we do this better? And that, you're so right, skilling and education to me is critical if we are to get to the kind of optimism I've projected for 2030 and then beyond that.
So education obviously brings us to what is in news, which is the UGC circular about allowing the top 500 universities to possibly set up campuses in India. Do you think, of course we do understand that in India especially there are many a slip between the cup and the lip, but do you really think that this could be a game changer?
Frankly, I don't think so. I don't think we are going to attract the kind of universities which we'd like to attract, which is why the government or the UGC has now made it from the top 100, which if you recall was in an earlier draft to top 500. They know the top 100 won't come for a number of reasons, and you know, one can go into detail on that. But to me, far more important would have been a reform that liberates and frees up our own system. And now it's worse because you're allowing foreign universities to come in with, you know, great deal of freedom. I wouldn't say full, but great deal of freedom. And the Indian universities are working with their hands tied. How is this competition going to work? You're going to get a lot of faculty going away to these universities, and these are going to be high-cost ones. So you're going to get high-cost, reasonably high quality, with foreign branding coming in, trying to compete with universities in India which have lost their top faculty, which charge low fees but turn out low quality. So what's going to happen? You're going to get a huge disparity. Anybody who can afford it is going to go to those universities. So those who can't will be left here with poorer teaching. It's like what we see today in the classical, and there are lots of exceptions, but classical government primary school. So everybody who can afford to, even the, you know, almost poor people, pay out of their pocket to send their children to a private school, because the perception is it's far better than the government school. And this is going to happen, this disparity. So I am not enthused by this new bill at all. I don't think we'll get what you wanted. I think you'll yet get people going abroad and spending that money that they are, because the university system here, which potentially could be good, is just breaking apart. And the reasons, to reiterate, are high centralization and control, no freedom, no flexibility. Some academic bureaucrat in the UGC sends a circular which is applicable to all universities in India from north to south, one end to the other, standardizing curriculum, standardizing exam dates. I mean, hey, it's winter in Kashmir, and in the south, they can go to school and work. And you want everybody at the same time, the same date, the same course, the same curriculum. What is this here? We are not a country of, 5 million people in a small island. We are a continent.
So true. So well said. So do you think, like we see the MOOCs, the EdTech, do you think some solutions could come from there? Of course, we have one or two examples which haven't really done us proud, but we can't really blame the whole ecosystem for that. So do you think EdTech could be an answer there?
Yeah, I think very much so in part. It has to be done very cleverly, because EdTech, and we have seen this during COVID, gives you the opportunity of getting really high quality teaching across to those who will not have access to it. But the proviso is that you need to provide that access in terms of the required infrastructure, which means the hardware, the computer, at least a smartphone, but ideally a laptop, and the connectivity, and the ability to make sure there's power and the connectivity sustains. And those are difficult in India, but yet potentially some form of hybrid where you need face-to-face, but a lot of things can be done online, could be a good solution for India, and I think it's moving that way. And more people with more experiments are beginning to use this more. As technology moves ahead and you get to virtual reality, augmented reality, it's no longer going to be a chalk and talk which is put online. It's going to be far more use of animation, of virtual reality, which helps understanding, learning. But you can't substitute the physical, especially for schools, because that social interaction amongst peers, that is between students and between teacher and student, can never be done away for social skills. And when one of our failings in the education system is not just the content, it's the lack of soft skills, which come from the kind of socialization that could happen in a physical environment in school. But it will have to be a mix, and especially at the higher education level, and even more so for in-service upgradation, updating, which is going to be critical. You know, if today I keep telling engineering graduates, you're from the top school, you're from one of the IITs, in 5 years you'll be obsolete because your knowledge is not there unless you keep up. And how are you going to keep up? The keeping up part can be best and most easily done by some good online stuff, which is available. And you've got to make sure you spend time, work on that. So good potential there for learning new things, for making sure you're up to date. But at school and primary level, I think we have to be cautious. The human interaction is yet critical, can be supplemented, but then you have to make sure there's access. Otherwise, you again create a disparity.
So true. In fact, I think the social fabric, the inclusivity in organizations, those are challenges anyway. And if we would not have a robust personal interaction at the education level, these challenges might really become much bigger. In fact, I'm reminded of our publishing industry, you know, where we saw 3 generational shifts within 1 generation. You know, we were largely dependent on family-owned independent stores, which were followed immediately in the decades of 2000s with large corporates coming into bookselling. And before they could really, dig their heels, we had e-commerce, and then we had e-books. So within a decade, we saw 3 generational shifts, which is really the story of so many things in India. You mentioned the 3 C's in your introduction. And if we were to talk about something which seems to be a long-term, starting from today to a long-term challenge, one could say climate change could be one of that. And we all know that all these challenges again sort of hamper the people more at the bottom of the pyramid than possibly at the top. We're already talking about climate resilient infrastructure. There are, hopefully, the governments of the day are aware of the challenges. But do you think there are areas where we need to really be more agile? And what could really be doing there?
You know, at the macro level, Shobit, I think we're doing a lot. And, you know, we have moved to a great deal of renewable energy. We need to do more. We need more R&D on storage. There's a huge hydrogen mission which has been announced recently, which is great. My only disappointment on that, which I think a great initiative, is that only 400 of the 9,000 crores is assigned to R&D. This yet requires a lot of R&D, and I wish they'd put in a bigger amount. But no complaints on the macro level. At the micro level, we have a lot of operational problems, starting with how we deal with crisis and how we plan for them. And the best examples are the extreme weather events which we saw in our large cities, which make it more visible. This happens around the country, by the way, and rural areas are even more affected and more seriously and affected for longer. But the media attention is on the bigger cities, and so you see them. As I told someone that, you know, I wish, I wrote about this, that while Bombay wants to become Shanghai, I think they're becoming Venice, or Bangalore did. You know, lots of waterways, bits of islands here and there. You need boats to go around, not cars. So I think it's a failure on the municipal management more than anything else, and the way we allow between unthinking and corrupt practices cities to flourish and grow. We've just seen a very, very sad thing in Joshimath. Now, you know, all of us may have our own views on what that happens, but I think enthusiasm for development projects which are not development is causing part of the problem. If you want a huge 6-lane road because you say it's necessary for, you know, tourists and necessary for defense, if that road collapses, whom is it going to help? The tourists and defense? It's not really. If you want power, of course we need power. You're going to dig a tunnel in a geologically sensitive region and ignore reports which are there from 1976. Doesn't make sense. That's not development. So who says it's development versus ecology? It's just non-development versus sensible development. And I think on that count, we need to do a lot more. But climate change is worrisome. Some of it, we need to take care of it, but a lot of it is global. And this is a great thing about our G20 presidency, and I'm very, very happy to see the amount of emphasis that the government is putting on this at the global level, because it's what others do that also affects us. Look at Pakistan. I mean, what they suffered. and they've been able to get money. I wish they got as reparations. And I told somebody that they or we jointly, South Asia, should go to the International Court of Justice and say, hey, you guys, the Americans and Europeans have messed up the whole climate for the last 100 years. You better pay whenever we have a problem. But I think we do our bit, but it's a good chance for us as G20, under G20 presidency, to try and get the world along. And fortunately, I do see a lot of pressure from within those countries themselves to begin to do things which will be sensible. The Ukraine's war has set things back because gas and oil is not available and people are going back to fossil fuels, but hopefully that's temporary.
Yeah, and that's really inspiring because in spite of the fact that we are the lowest on per capita income in G20, we are possibly the only country which is slated to fulfill its 2015 Paris. So if that's not going to inspire the rest of the 19, what will? You mentioned conflict, you mentioned climate change, and hopefully we are beyond COVID. So do you really think that after 1991, the direction that we've taken, it's broadly the same direction? I mean, there'll be ebbs and flows like there are everywhere in a democracy like India. There are, of course, greater challenges. But do you really think that, could we really turn into a Hippo? Is there a possibility that something like that might happen?
I worry because success makes us individually and I guess organizations and then maybe countries egoistic. And then when you become successful as at the macro level, which is GDP, and you say we are the third biggest country, and then you have become aspirations to more power and your aspirations to show the path to others and put them in their place, inevitably. I mean, as I said, individually, and I'm sure there are many people here, CEOs of their organizations, who on reflection think, yeah, I'm pushing too much. So, my worry is that as we grow in terms of our macroeconomy, even though as you rightly said and emphasized, the per capita income will continue to be the lowest in G20, even in 2030, we might tend to take on the mantle of wanting superpower development. No harm in that by itself. But I would worry that in the process, particularly in our own neighborhood, where you're already as big brother, inevitably for all big brothers, we see that as a bit of a bully. So we've got to bend over backwards. I mean, let me just give you one figure which pains me. There's so much noise being made about everywhere, from Delhi to Bengal to the Bangladeshi refugees. Just look at the hard facts. 2001 census, 2011 census. The number of Bangladeshi-born migrants in India has come down, not gone up. Bangladesh is growing at an economic rate faster than ours. If anything, there will be migration from India to Bangladesh. Third, the percentage of Bangladeshis in India is 1/4 the number of Indians in the US. We don't complain about Indians in the US, so what are we screaming and shouting about? This is a Hippo mentality. Everybody around is bullied and treated badly and given all kinds of words. We blockaded Nepal for some time. I'm with the political conspiracy which I won't go into. I'm just saying, hey, the Nepalese people, what will they think if India stops fuel going there? What sense does it make? We've been helping Sri Lanka too. That's one country with which we've had recently good relations. Myanmar, terrible Rohingya refugees. Some of them undoubtedly are not the kind we want around. But they're refugees. India's always opened its arms to refugees. For years, for centuries, it's been a mainstay. And that has made us the Gazelle image, a friendly country. When the Tibetans came, we welcomed them, we gave them place, we looked after them and continue to look after them. What happened to our humanity? That's a Gazelle. Of late, we have been showing a little bit of a trend to be Hippo-like. And that concerns me because as we grow, as I said, ego grows, we begin to then take that on more seriously and say, who's a small guy to try and pinprick? They will pinprick you. Come on, that guy's like a younger brother. He wants to show his way once in a while. Let him do it. But that's what I would say. So that's a concern. But I'm an optimist. And I think that good sense is and will prevail. And we will take on the role of being more generous and more kind. Not to your neighbors, but rather to God.
Amen to that. On optimism, you sort of end your book with the concept of happiness. And true happiness would obviously come when each individual is connected to a higher cause. Which brings me to one area where we haven't really spoken about too much, or we don't see too much of that in India, which is social entrepreneurship. Um, what how could we make the ecosystem more fertile? Of course, there are good things happening, good organizations. I can't help but mention an organization like Goonj, a friend of mine runs it, which has been doing some incredible work. But why don't we see much more social entrepreneurship in India, and what could be done to lead us to that?
Very briefly, I think time's up. So very briefly, Shobit, I disagree with you. I think you're seeing a lot more of it, and a tremendous upsurge in it. Also, a tremendous amount of support for the ecosystem. In earlier days, you had to be a do-gooder like Gunj to do it. Now there's money available for it. People are willing to fund social entrepreneurship, and some of it is becoming the standard catchphrase: doing well and doing good, which is the ideal. But there's enough money even to just do good, and the amount of philanthropic funding coming in, not just from CSR. From just pure philanthropy is hugely gone up. So I see great potential in that. I see a lot of young people who are very idealistic and want to do things that are different. They want to make a difference. They want to make others happy. And to me, that's a good sign. Yes, very good question. How do we spread that and make it more widespread? I think it's something to think about. But to me, the signs are good. And I do see idealism, willingness to help others, a sense that it's a duty, not just there, but also a pleasure to be able to do that kind of work.
Great. So, I think I'll throw open the floor for
just
questions.
add, social impact, younger people are doing even before they achieve anything. They're doing good at the start of their career is achieving something. I think that's the difference. And then first generation entrepreneurs made lots of money, are really becoming philanthropists even bigger. I mean, like Ashish Tam, I'm just giving you an example. So I support what Dr. Karnik is saying.
Briefly, very good point, Anurag. In the old days, older generation, my generation and younger generations like yours are even younger, you first did well and then you did good. So the giving back concept, and I have nothing against it, it's a good thing to do. But today you're so right, I see a lot of young people who want to first do good. And when they do good, they begin suddenly to get picked up and begin to do well. Then offers of jobs, things that they do. So you're so right. And that's a change which I think is very important.
Good evening, sir. I have a question. In fact, I have two questions. First, like the country like India, us, we have a huge population and we need employment for those population. Vis-a-vis other side, we are talking about automation, mass production. So how you can feel that there will be a balance production by mass versus mass production? Thank you.
Again, very briefly, I see 2 or 3 good signs in terms of technology. First, I think more and more it's being established that the ideal is not human or machine, it is human plus machine. That combination seems to work very, very well. It requires certain skills which we talked about, but that combination works well. Second, I see hope in the fact that technology allows decentralized production. So it's no longer, scale, it's no longer economies of scale, it's economies of scope. So you can decentralize and make small amounts of things in a number of places. So you see a decentralization of industry, which you're already beginning to see in some ways, where it can go out because connectivity is excellent, roads will be very good, so both physical and electronic infrastructure will enable you to expand into small areas, remote areas, villages. And third, as facilities improve there, which is something in terms of the ecosystem we have to do, you see more people willing to go there. Already we see people post-COVID wanting to work from not home, work from anywhere. So they'll go to a place which is a favorite. I mean, I know a number of people, because I lived there some time, on and off, who go to Goa and they say, I don't have to be in Bombay or Delhi or Chennai. I can work from Goa as well. And they go and settle there. They have nothing, no connection there. So you see more of that as this connectivity improves. So you get decentralization and therefore a flourishing of jobs. Because when people go to places like this, the ecosystem develops. You get a restaurant, you get a small shop, then you become a mall, you get more employment. So it will feed on itself. That's my hope, and I think we're heading that way.
Thank you, sir.